All right, y'all, it's another edition of Scouting with Coach. Today, we are going to be working on analyzing players in a brief fashion. We know you got some cattle to wrangle. We know you got some steaks to eat, and we just want to get you, onto that as soon as possible. So I've got a player in front of me here, and I'm going to show you how it's done. So first, the only language this man speaks is violence. This is a Serbian center back here, and this is, watch very closely, this is how you scan these fellers to make sure that you get all the information on whether they're good or not. You ready? Here we go. Yeah, that's about it. Have a good rest of the video. So unlike Coach, we actually are going to go through the different ways that can help speed up your assessing of players in Football Manager. And honestly, the most important thing in Football Manager is getting a good team, because if you have a good team, tactics don't matter, dynamics matter less, right? Because the better the team is, the less everything else matters. So knowing which players to sign and which players not to sign is very important. And I've had a couple of you guys remark to me that, how do you do it so quickly? Well, obviously playing the game for a ton of hours helps you break down with the color-codedness what is important, what's not, and your brain can kind of take in that information easier and easier every time. But there are some shortcuts and there's some definite things that you need to know. What are those? I'm going right now, man. I'm like literally, I'm on the way. I'm clicking to the... So my Twitch save, Twitch, it's in the description. If you want to click on the link, you can come hang out with me. I stream 5 days a week right now. We just completed an off season with my team called Oriental Dragon. So over the course of that off season, acquired over 10 players that are now a part of the team. And with each one, you have to do an equation in your head where you look at the attributes, you consider the wage, you consider the cost it's going to take to bring the player into the club, and have to calculate whether it is worth it. This is a very difficult thing to do when you consider all of the elements that you are supposed to consider. But that's okay. We're going to make it easier for you, because here is a list of the things that you need to pay attention to when you are weighing whether to sign a player or not, because it is super easy to get distracted when you look at a player that has a bunch of attributes that are really high, because a player that has a bunch of attributes that are really high doesn't necessarily mean that they're good. So what you need to do is weigh the relevance of the attributes for the player that you are trying to sign. You have to understand where the stars are coming from. These come from a lot of different places, and we will get into that. Then there's the economic part of it. Cost-benefit analysis. Even if a player is the best player in the world, if they completely bankrupt your club and put you in an irredeemable financial situation, it's probably not worth signing Messi. You might want to just take that money and sign a couple of people that are very good and are going to help you get to where you want to go. Anyways, and the last one is remember hidden attributes. Now let's dive in. Your first part is weighing the relevance of the attributes when you look at a player. Now, there are certain players that are a lot better than you'll initially think, because when you look at them, their attributes do not stand out. There are other players that are worse than you think because their attributes are distributed poorly. You hear me say this on stream all the time. Well, this guy is just a weird player. Like, he's a weird guy. And what's an example of a weird guy? Jean Dubois. So this is a 17-year-old that when I initially saw him, I realized I could offer him a minimum wage contract and he had decent potential. He was somebody I would be able to sign. What mistakes did I make? Well, I looked at him and saw that he was a young fullback, and that was something that I was interested in. But if you look at this for a few seconds and you click to the appropriate position and that you would want that person to play, and you click perhaps the role that you would want them to play, it will highlight all of the attributes that are important. So even if your brain is not accustomed to go fullback, I'm looking at acceleration, agility, pace, work rate, stamina, marking, positioning, ability to tackle, and any sort of offensive ability, whether it's ability to dribble, ability to cross, some passing ability, whatever. And I didn't do that. So I end up having to turn this guy into a center back, because even though he is a natural fullback, I am never feasibly going to be able to use him as a fullback, because he has 4 acceleration, 4 agility, and 5 pace. I mean, it's freaking useful. Useless. That was a mistake in signing, but this is just that weird type of player. You see the 17-year-old good potential, you see the green, you go, woo. Hopefully you don't make a noise that weird, but you make a noise like that. But take a second. Weigh the benefit of the attributes. And a perfect example of me getting this right in my quick snap decision making is, oddly, I'm weighing whether to loan in a bunch of different people, and I find this guy who's at Toulouse, and I think, well, what am I going to loan this guy in? Problem is, I'm playing a formation that does not use wingers. So even though Adli is rated as a 3-star by a scout that I trust, and he's a decent, good first-team player, that rating is for him being a winger, because that is his only natural position. But where am I going to use him? I'm going to use him at attacking midfield. So I take stock of exactly how I'm going to use this player in the relevant attributes that are most likely to contribute to his success in that position, which all of a sudden we've narrowed down to. In this tactic, I want Amin Adli to play as an attacking midfielder. There's a bunch of different ways to play as an attacking midfielder. You can be essentially the spoke in the middle of the wheel where you don't move and everybody else moves. You can be incredibly active and pick the ball up everywhere. All depends on the instructions you give the player. I realized quickly that Amin Adli has the passing, has the vision, and then has the dribbling and athleticism and work rate and stamina of a decent winger that's going to make it very difficult for him to be marked if he's just running around, picking the ball up, running around again, and then distributing it somewhere. And that decision has paid out wonders, because in the first 4 games of the season, he has an assist and a goal in 2 matches. This can only be so relevant when you're just looking at one player. The most common experience you're going to have here is trying to decide between 2, maybe 3 or 4 different players that you are attempting to fill the same spot in your team with. And so I will put you in my shoes in this situation. I had to make a decision between 24-year-old center back Ryan Suchi and a loan for 21-year-old center back Luca Vandergeeg. I do believe I made the right decision here, and this is one of the more interesting decisions, layered decisions that I had to make. So we have 2 center backs, and we are playing in a system that is fairly direct. We're not asking our center backs to be incredibly skilled ball playing players. We don't want them to be terrible at it either. So you start in an overview position where you get an attribute web. A lot of people use this attribute web. You can get it on individual player screens as well. If you just move the biography, you can do an attribute analysis, and people are able to assess how good a player is in different facets of the game very quickly visually that way. But when you're in the comparison screen, it's the first thing that's going to pop up, and then you can click over to attributes. And this is where things always get interesting, because when it comes to the star rating of somebody I really trust, an assistant coach that's got 16 and 16 judging player ability and judging player potential, these guys have the same star rating. There looks like a fairly even balance when you come in here to say, oh, well, Vandergeeg is more technical, right? But Ryan Suchi looks perhaps more intelligent and definitely a little bit more athletic. But the choice becomes clear when you take the extra second and zero in, and you can still get help on this comparison screen up in the top right. From this top right, you can highlight attributes for any role that you could possibly think of. So central defender, on defend, all of a sudden we've highlighted a bunch of attributes that are relevant to the position. But these are not the only attributes that you should be paying attention to, depending on your tactical style, the relevance extending beyond this. So in the technical section, you can see that a lot of the things that Luca Vandergeeg is better at are not particularly relevant to being a central defender on defend and what they're going to be asked to do. And again, I said, if you're a team that really requires your center backs to play well, you're playing out from the back, you're playing them the ball off goal kicks, passing and technique, those sorts of things, and first touch are going to become more important. You never want them to be bad, but the advantages that Vandergeeg has, albeit slight in those areas, are essentially canceled out. And the next, we move on to the mental area. And this is where a perceived evenness between Ryan Suchi and Luca Vandergeeg evaporates, because a lot of the attributes that are just at least fairly important, the blue is less important than the green and the highlighting, a lot of them are going to Vandergeeg in wide margins over Ryan Suchi, despite Suchi's increased experience, which means his mentals should be better. Mentals are the one thing that really do accumulate with age aggressively. And then we go to the physical side, where it looks like Ryan Suchi has a bit of an edge. I mean, he's got the jumping reach. He has a 5 advantage in strength. But there is one important thing that made this signing decision easy for me. Dramatic pause. Vandergeeg is significantly quicker. I play a higher line when I play. And that's not a surprise. A lot of people play higher lines, and when you do, the ability to recover defensively is incredibly valuable. In 12 pace, 12 acceleration, and 12 agility, even with a little worse balance, is very rare for a center back at the Portuguese third division level, and in my opinion cancels out the advantage in positioning and the advantage in strength, considering my other center back is a very strong player and the captain of my team, strong personality even. What Football Manager does not have the ability to do yet is change the way that it highlights based off of your tactic, and that would be great to help people understand what's happening in the game more, because even though concentration is blue here, concentration determines how often you lose focus in situations like, say, getting beaten in an offside trap or something like that, and having 5 more concentration and more speed means that Luca van der Gaag is going to save me multiple goals per season, just because he is either in the right spot or able to recover from a bad position to prevent an easy goal over the top while we're applying extreme pressure. This turns this into a no contest, and I loaned in Luca van der Gaag. You might be asking, are there any situations where it flips and Rayan Suchi is the type of guy that you would want? My answer is no, but we're going to get to that later. Now it's time to talk about star ratings, because you're going to base a lot of your initial scouting and stuff and set thresholds based off of star ratings or maybe a scout recommendation. If you don't know what a scout recommendation is, it's this number 1 through 100, color-coded conveniently. And the scout recommendation, very quickly, based off how much you should trust the scout, just like the star rating, but it also includes like how easy the player would be to sign, their ability to adapt to the new team, those sorts of things. Well, the star rating is more heavily affected by form and just the ability of the player. If the player's coming through and has been scouted, like my boy Max Christoffel, which prime name there, you can click on the person and you will see at the top, last scouted by João Cardoso on 8/24/2022. And you have this star range. And if you're curious, like what isn't included in the current ability ratings yet, you can actually click here. And then there's like the areas yet to assess. So you can see what this scout has not learned about the person yet. And you'll see a lot of words that maybe you'd never thought about before that we'll get to at the end of this video. But you can know what your scout hasn't really taken stock of yet when it comes to the star rating. And the star rating is entirely dependent on the judging player ability, and judging player potential affects their ability to judge the star rating for potential. But what happens when a player is already on your team? So you're trying to figure out, oh, well, he's only 2.5 stars on my team. Or maybe when you sign a guy, the star rating changes. Well, that's not a surprise. There's no universal star rating anywhere, because when you click here, you'll see that the report is compiled by Pwnsorter, which shout out to Pwnsorter for redeeming a member of my staff in the Twitch chat. That's cool. Just so happens, Pwnsorter, if you go look in your staff and your coaching, he's my assistant coach, he's got some pretty good judging player ability and judging player potential, especially for the level that we're at. So get your best member of your staff. If you're a big club, sign a coach specifically just for this purpose, the ability to provide reports on your players that you can trust, because the more you can trust it, the better it is. And then all of a sudden you've got star ratings on your team you can trust, and you understand how much you should trust the reports coming in from your scouts. It is worth noting your scouting reports are never going to be incredibly far off. I mean, unless the scout is absolutely terrible, they'll miss by a star, maybe a star and a half if they're really not having a good day. You're never going to have somebody miss by like 5 stars, but a star and a half can make a huge difference on whether you sign somebody or not. So the end point of this is never, ever use the stars as a final guide to your decision. Literally everything else is more important. The stars are a starting guide, not a finishing guide. Cool, moving on. And that is the cost benefit analysis. If you click on finances, you see where you stand, transfer budget and payroll wise. Typically, especially if you're a smaller club like I am, there will be some sort of cap on the amount of money you can spend. So you actually have a relative reference point for how many players per how much money you have available to fit in your payroll budget, the transfer budget's a lot more obvious in cost benefit analysis, because it's just literally how much money you're going to spend in order to get that player in and how much money you'll have left over once you do. And this is where you go back to the first thing we talked about, which is just weighing how much better or how much worse the attributes that are important for that position in the way that you want to play compared to everybody else. And believe it or not, this actually works the same way with registration, because I recently this offseason signed Julian Ramirez. The problem with Julian Ramirez is that he's not Portuguese, which in the 3rd division of Portugal is a pretty big problem. because I am only allowed 4 players that aren't homegrown Portuguese in my entire matchday squad, which, if you're like me and didn't know what that meant when you started playing Football Manager, means not only the starting 11, but the bench too. So I have had to turn down a bunch of goalkeepers that are better than the goalkeeper that I have, because I would not be able to fit a winning team into the registration if the person I had to put in goal every time that was just better and I had spent resources on to acquire was costing me one of the very precious non-homegrown spots in the entire matchday squad. And that's a trade-off that I decided was worth us being able to win, because not only did I have to assume that Julian Ramirez was a better player than any other striker that I had that would play this position, I also had to assume that Julian Ramirez was so much a better player, it was worth having him over anybody else I would use to fill that foreign player spot. And I had to look at João Manuel and say, look, I think this guy is good enough to play at this level. And you can trust the person giving you stars to tell you he's a decent player for whatever division you're at, or maybe the division below or the division above, as long as you trust the person you're talking to even a little bit. So no reason to waste resources there, even though there's 25 goalkeepers on my short list probably that are better than João Manuel. None of them are on my team because I have Julian Ramirez. And then on you play. Now we have to go back to our familiar comparison between 2 players before, because when you go to this comparison screen, I'm still holding the glove. There is a scouting report. When you click on that, you are privy to a bunch of information that is not readily available in the attributes. When your eyeballs hit the screen for the first time, none of this stuff is available, but it can actually be the entire make or break of signing a player. And there are a couple of key things I'm just going to tell you to look out for. The rest you'll get a feel for over time and aren't going to affect things as much. The number one key thing is fear of big matches, because the time that you want your best players to be there are the derbies and the cup finals and the late season matches. And if you have Ryan Suchi, and we go to his scouting report, guess what he doesn't have? The ability to play in big matches. And notice this is color coded. He has dark red. Doesn't feel comfortable playing in big matches. To me, that is actually the number one deal breaker in the entire game. I have had saves ruined by the fact that my 3 or 4 top players all didn't like playing in big matches in one form or another. Does that mean signing one guy like that is bad? No, I have one guy like that. And does that mean that those players are bad all the time? Of course, it doesn't mean they're bad all the time. They're still able to play. But I am willing to sign people that don't like big matches, just not in large numbers and not at positions that I absolutely have to have, like a striker or a goalkeeper or a center back in this case, where if that person's not on their game, it can completely single-handedly destroy your ability to win. Maybe a center midfielder, a fullback, like somebody that's not completely capable of absolutely destroying your ability to win a game. The other thing you need to look out for is something Ryan Suchi actually has in aces and spades, and that's consistency. Now, consistency is just awesome. It's not, believe it or not, more important than big matches in my years of experience playing the game. And I have no problem signing mildly inconsistent players, but dark red consistency will rightfully give experienced FM players all over the world pause on signing a player. Now, full consistency obviously makes you happy to sign somebody, but if they're fully consistent at being bad, it really doesn't matter. And then the other hidden one is adaptability. Now, if you see adaptability in the red, I don't care about it unless it's in the red, right? Green adaptability, congratulations, happy for you. If the adaptability is in the red, that just means it's going to take them longer to gel. And to be honest, when you sign somebody, you don't want to wait a whole year for them to be up to their normal selves because they're feeling all weird and out of their element. Bad adaptability is more than reasonable to force you to back out of, buying a player. And a lot of people ask, is there any other way to tell if these players have these attributes if your scout can't find them? There is. It's personality. There are only a few personalities. You can Google personality tables that will actually indicate any of the things that I've talked about, and they'll only be talking about big matches and ability to handle pressure situations. Personalities are pretty mundane in the early stages of the game, and I have other videos to talk about that, so we will not extend this video by talking about it here, but it's something to look at.